Thanks to everyone for joining today. Hello and welcome to today's webinar organized by the Free Network, the Forum for Research on Eastern Europe and Emerging Economies. My name is Michal Myck. I'm the director of the Polish node of the network, the Center for Economic Analysis in Szczecin. Our recent webinars have been organized with the background of the dramatic conditions caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Two earlier discussions focused on sanctions imposed on Russia and on energy imports, and their recordings are still accessible online for those who's interested. The title of today's webinar is "Fleeing the War Zone, Will Open Hearts Be Enough?" And we will discuss the wave of migrants forcefully displaced as a consequence of the Russian invasion and the atrocities committed by the Russian army in Ukraine. At the end of 2020, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees estimated the total number of forcefully displaced people in the world to be at about 82 million. And tragically, as we've seen over the past 2 weeks, these numbers have been quickly growing. Over 2.8 million people have crossed the border from Ukraine to the neighboring countries in the last few weeks. And of course, many more have been internally displaced within Ukraine. So let me introduce today's panelists. We are joined by Maciej Duszczyk, professor at the Faculty of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Warsaw, by Hanna Vakhitova, professor at the Kiev School of Economics, a school which has been very active in various fields despite the difficult and challenging times. And we are full of admiration for all the activities and initiatives of the KSC staff. Thanks a lot, Hanna, for joining us. The third panelist, Jesper Roine, professor at the Stockholm School of Economics and deputy director of the Stockholm Institute of Transition Economics, the hosting institution behind these webinars. And last but not least, Annika, Sunden, economist and member of DELMI, the Migration Studies Delegation, which is a Swedish independent committee on migration. A brief overview of what will happen in the next hour or so. The panelists will give brief presentations, and then this will be followed by questions and discussion, and everyone is welcome to place your questions to the panelists in the chat, and we'll pass them on. Let's start with Maciej Duszczyk. Maciej has been very active over the last few weeks in the debate in Poland and the policy discussions around the developments that we have witnessed, and following closely the incoming wave of migrants from Ukraine to Poland and neighboring countries. Maciej, the floor is yours, and we're looking forward to your overview.
Thank you very much, Michal, for this very kind invitation. And during the next few minutes, I will try to share with you my knowledge about the current situation in Poland. As you know, the situation is very liquid. The situation is changed every hours. That's why before the seminar, I try to update the newest data, and I will try to show you this absolutely amazing movement of the civic society, non-governmental organization, but on the role of the self-governments, but also the government, because we have the new special law about how we would like to support the Ukrainian refugees during the next weeks and months. And I think that I will not speak longer than maybe 15-20 minutes. So let me start. Of course, I will be open for to respond to any questions later on. So the latest data show that since February 24, the Polish border has already been crossed by 1.8 million refugees from Ukraine. It is over 60% of all who left Ukraine. As you probably know, also the Ukrainians are crossing the border with Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, and Moldova. And Moldova is relatively very small countries, which also welcomed more than at now 400,000 of refugees. But a lot of them decided already to cross the Romanian border to come to European Union. In the case of Poland, approximately 97% were people with Ukrainian citizenship. Most of the foreigners staying in Ukraine before the war and who came to Poland have already left and went to their countries of origin. I'm speaking now about especially the students who studied in Ukraine and crossed the Polish border, and the different embassies organized the return flights for them from Polish airports. Our estimates show that there are currently approximately 1.1 million Ukrainians in Poland. They stay mainly in large cities such as Warsaw, Krakow, or Wrocław. The rest of Ukrainians who crossed the Polish border went to other EU member states and outside Europe, voluntary, especially to Canada or the United States. This is the countries outside the European Union, where their families and friends live. In the first days after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, assistance to refugees was provided mostly by Polish families and households, as well as by the owners of guest houses and hotels who made them available for the purpose of providing accommodation to refugees. A similar situation took place at the border and at the railway and bus station where refugees were arriving. This assistance consisted mainly in the provision of the basic necessities, such as food, hygiene products, or medical or psychological first aid. The involvement of the civil society is absolutely amazing. There is no example in the history of migration. So many non-governmental organizations and volunteers have been mobilized in such a short period of time, and that many grassroots initiatives were initiated. It is very difficult to describe it. You have to see it with your own eyes. One should also be aware that in the first days, Polish families sheltered several hundreds thousand refugees, often in their own homes and apartments. There are basically two social groups from Ukraine in Poland. These are women with children and the elderly over 60 years of age. This is related to the internal regulations of Ukraine, which prohibit men between the age of 18 and 60 from leaving the country. Among them, there is a large group of people who require very specialized support. For example, children suffering from oncological diseases or the elderly with a high degree of disability. These people are provided with the necessary support, but if these people become more and more necessary, it will be necessary to ask about the efficiency of the Polish health system and support for disabled people. To my knowledge, the influx of such large number in such short period of time is absolutely unique in the recent history, not only of Europe, but also of the world. In the first days after the war broke out, the situation at the border was very difficult. The waiting time for crossing the border was up to 70 hours. However, this was related to problems with the information system on the Ukrainian side and the limited number of border guards. Currently, crossing of borders is liquid. Every day, we register 80 to 100,000 crossing of border. Before the war, it was about the 15,000. At the same time, over 80,000 people left for Ukraine in the last 20 days. People, mainly men, whose goals was to join the army or territorial defense in Ukraine to support Ukrainian soldiers and troops. For a long time, the Polish government held the position that there would be no need to build refugee centers. There were even statements of ministers that it is the government's contribution to dealing with the influx of refugees without building temporary residence centers. However, the government changed its mind in the middle of the previous week and decided to open a dozen centers located in the market and sports halls. Currently, over 100,000 people are staying there. These centers, however, are not adapted to stay longer than a few days. It is necessary to prepare a housing infrastructure in which refugees will be able to stay for 2 or 3 months until they find another place to stay. So far, we have dealt essentially with 2 of the 3 possible migratory waves. In the first of them, people whose family members or friends lived in Poland or in other European Union member states were residing to Poland. For example, in Poland before the war, there were approximately 800,000 Ukrainians who worked or studied in Poland. In the second wave, after the bombing of civilian facilities in the large cities, there are people who have no families or friends in Poland. They require full assistance. A third wave is also possible, and it may be much larger than the previous 2. It may occur when the situation at the front worsens and there are repressions by the Russian troops. Such reports are coming from Eastern Ukraine. In such a situation, we would even be dealing with a few additional millions that would leave Ukraine. This time, it should be assumed that they would also be men. This scenario is currently very unlikely to be true, but it cannot be completely ruled out. Since last week, we have seen an increase in the activity of both local representatives of the government administration and the governments. Information has been gathered about vacancies in smaller cities and local communities where refugees might be accommodated. This is because large cities are on the verge of being able to manage the influx of refugees. In addition, a special law entered into force today, which provides for a catalog, the list of support tools for refugees. The main issues are possibility of obtaining an individual identification number, in Polish PESEL, which will enable opening an account, a bank account, access to the labor market, education, and social benefits. It will be possible to apply for this number from Wednesday this week. Certainly, there will be a large quiz in the first period, as the procedure is complicated and rather bureaucratic. We explain a lot of different queues in the local offices to try to provide to get this special individual identification number. The government decided to gather all of the necessary information at once, which could cause big problems and waste a lot of time. Potentially, up to 1 million of Ukrainians may apply for this number in the near future, in the next days and weeks. The second, it is the reimbursement of the cost of stay of refugees from Ukraine in Polish families and in private hotels and guest houses. It is about €8 a day for one person. However, receiving this refund requires submitting a special application to the commune office, to the local government, which may again cause various kinds of perturbations and even resignation from obtaining such support, for example, for families who welcomed, for example, mother with the two children. The bureaucratic obstacles might be difficult to get this assistance, to this support, this money support from the local governments. And the third one, Ukrainian children can be enrolled in Polish schools. It will also be possible to open school branches in centers for temporary stay and Ukrainian classes in Polish school. At present, however, the preferred model is including Ukrainian children in Polish classes. Currently, there are no major problems with it, but only about the 10% of Ukrainian children have entered connection. The solution can be distance learning or hybrid learning. The priority is to involve children in education so that they do not waste their time in Poland from the point of view of the educational process. But also the providing the access to the schools would be, after the providing of this access to the school would be possible also to their mother to try to find a real job. because still a lot of Ukrainian women have to carry on their children. The third, unfortunately, contrary to the advice of experts, the Act does not provide for a simplified system of recognizing the qualification of female teachers, educators, or psychologists from Ukraine. Such recognition could to some extent solve the problem of staff in Polish schools. However, a simplified system of recognition of qualification has been provided for doctors and nurses. All adults from Ukraine who arrived after February 24 have free access to the labor market. Until the middle of last week, the Polish government didn't apply to other member states of the European Union for support. Now the situation has changed. Over the weekend alone, more than 20 trains were organized, which made it possible for refugees interested in living, for example, to Germany, to leave Poland. A future relocation is expected in the near future. However, it is completely different than the relocation from 2016. It is done on a voluntary, not compulsory, not mandatory basis. Therefore, its success should be considered as as a great. It is very difficult to predict what will happen in the next days or weeks. It depends mainly on the situation in Ukraine. However, it should be emphasized that Poland is managing the migration challenge very well. However, as I have already mentioned, this is due to absolutely exceptional commitment of civil society. Certainly, in the coming months, Poland will not be able to cope with the integration of more than 800,000 people into the labor market education. Of course, it is possible to provide ad hoc support, but it is completely different from including refugees into Polish society. They are still treated as the guests who will return to Ukraine in some time. Such an assumption should not be changed, in my opinion, until middle of May, when the situation in Ukraine will be more predictable. We must also be aware that we are dealing with interpersonal families who will want to reunite in a certain time perspective. It is not known, however, wherever in Poland or Ukraine, it depends on how the situation develops in the weeks and months to come. At the end, to conclude, I would like to recall my opinion, which is now very popular in various media or by representatives of the government, local governments, and non-governmental organizations. Helping refugees and managing migration crisis is a marathon, not a sprint. You have to be aware of this. All of us, we have to be aware of this. Thank you very much. And of course, I'm open to respond, to answer all of the questions later on. Thank you very much, Michal, and all of the panelists.
Thank you very much, Maciej. This is clearly a great overview of what has been happening, as we are coming to the end of the sprint, and we need to gather strength for not only a middle distance but at the long marathon. And it's a marathon that has well, surprised all of us and caught us by surprise. But as you said, the response of individual people in Poland and the NGOs has been extraordinary, and thanks to that, somehow this wave could have been managed. Hanna, we've discussed the wave of migrants who have left Ukraine, but I understand that similar waves are moving within the country, and it would be great to hear if you could tell us a little bit more about that, what has happened recently, but also what has been happening in Ukraine for the last few years, where the migration waves have been present after the breakout of the war in 2014. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I would like to start by praising the incredible hospitality by Poland, and in particular by Polish people. That's indeed something amazing, and we appreciate it truly, guys. Concerning the internal waves, there was a statistics that popped up just last week that 12% of Ukrainians that are in Ukraine right now have been displaced from their original settlements. So we are talking about 4.5 to 5 million people that are now in Ukraine, but they are located in some other cities or villages or anywhere. So overall, we are talking about almost 7.5 million of people who are displaced, or either within the country or abroad. And indeed, the refugees outside the country are mostly women with children or elderly. However, inside the country, we also have all the entire families being moved, as well as part of the families being moved, while mostly males are either in territory defense units or in the army, or also it refers to the elderly population, which for various reasons refuse to move immediately, and often kind of stay in their apartments till the very, very critical moment. So that complicates the evacuation of civilians because they, if they're adults and if they're elderly, they have complications. It's difficult for them to move, etc., etc. So that requires more resources, but we are doing the best we can. Of course, with the violence along the humanitarian corridors, that's difficult to do. And I also wanted to answer your second question concerning the previous experience. This war started in 2014, and it was particularly active in the first 2 years. In that time, 1.8 million were relocated at some point from these two oblasts, Donetsk and Lugansk, that were particularly affected. And that's roughly 1/3 of the population. And I also checked the statistics on Yugoslavia, and we also talk about 1/3 of the population. So if the violence spreads, and in particular the violence against the civilians, that quite possibly may turn into 12 million displaced people, and it quite can be possible that 1/3 to 1/2 of them can try to flee abroad. So the forecast that the UN made on the second day of the war, that they expect up to 4 million population, is very reasonable. Of refugees is pretty reasonable, and in fact maybe even underestimate. I don't hear you.
Michal, you are unmuted. You have to unmute.
Thank you. Do you want to go on with your presentation, Hanna?
Yeah, I wanted also to share with you some maps and numbers to give it visualize that. So here on that first map, you can see actually the situation that is going on right now. So the border, pretty much like half of the border from the north to the south to Crimea, but it's either the narrow belt or the the sprout to the big cities, in particular Kyiv. but some of the locations like Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv, Mariupol, sorry, they were badly affected. And these are large cities. Kyiv is 3.5 million population officially, and maybe 1 million of unofficial, unregistered people. Then Kharkiv is 1.5 to 2 million population. These are very big cities, and I'm not surprised that people are moving. But also you can see these small dots here and there. These are the places where the shelling was or bombing was took place. And of course, people nearby these areas, they also try to escape either to other regions or abroad. This is the map that shows you the situation at the first stage, let me call it that way, during the 2014 up to this year. And the areas that are in brown, these are the Lugansk and Donetsk Oblast. And this orange line shows the occupied territories. And you can see that most of the IDPs, they moved to this controlled parts of the oblast, while we also see some centers, especially like the second bell, which have hosted lots of IDPs, but about 60% of the people that moved to other areas, they stayed close to the conflict line. And that's why I think we only now observe like 1/3 of the relocation being refugees. But if the conflict covers the larger territory, and I hope that not, then of course I agree with Maciej that we will observe the larger flow of refugees. And my final slide is this reference to Bosnia-Herzegovina war, which kind of may give us the understanding of how likely this focus that I mentioned previously are. You can see here the area, and the dots correspond to their deaths, the number of people killed or disappeared. And basically this black line shows you the ethnical territories, Serbs versus Muslims. And again, we see this 1/3 of the million. This is basically 1/3 of the population being displaced. And I'm not quite sure whether it includes refugees or not, as a number. The hope here is that 1 million people, they actually returned after the conflict. So as Ukrainian, I expect quite a large number of refugees that are now flee abroad. They might return back to Ukraine. But however, I mean, some of them definitely will stay if the war proceeds, I don't know, years. If it takes years, then some people will stay. But I just want to second this last statement that we should not look at this. Of course, in Ukraine, we all hope that the conflict, the war will end soon. And there is incredible support of the army and incredible trust into the army. But we should not exclude the possibility that it may take longer.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Hanna, for this overview. And as we're talking about a longer term and preparing for the marathon, Sweden is a good example of a country that has had to manage a number of marathons. You mentioned, Hanna, the war in the former Yugoslavia. Many people from the former Yugoslavia migrated and found refuge in Sweden, and I'm sure many of those who are now leaving Ukraine will also direct themselves to Sweden. And Sweden also has welcomed a lot of refugees during the migration wave into Europe in 2015. We will now hear some comments about that, and I would like to pass on to Jesper with initial comments on Maciej's and Hanna's presentations, and then direct the discussion towards the experience of Sweden and perhaps lessons that Poland and the receiving countries today can learn from Sweden's experience. Jesper?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Michal. So first of all, thanks a lot, Maciej and Hanna, for your very insightful, interesting points on what's going on the ground at the moment. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking myself, since we have a true expert here who will take over in a sec. But I just wanted to, as a reflection, say that, you know, even though we're of course hoping that this ends sooner rather than later, so that people can return, I think it's wise to at least think about the possibility that things may drag on for a longer time, and brace ourselves or prepare ourselves to help, even in a situation where this does go on for a longer time. So I think this is it's a situation where it is indeed remarkable and very encouraging. I mean, there are many things to feel saddened about in the world in general, and in our neighborhood very recently, but certainly both the heroic resistance in Ukraine and the reception of refugees in Poland and other countries is indeed, you know, encouraging to see. And also I might add that in the Swedish debate, as some of you may or may not know, the fact that Sweden welcomed many refugees, especially in 2015, has led to some tension politically about, you know, how to deal with this and to what extent Sweden did too much in relation to other countries, etc. Currently, at least, that divide politically is gone. It's sort of evaporated in a very, to me, somewhat surprising way. Very, you know, encouraging, and I hope it stays that way. But at the moment, the attitude politically, even amongst those who previously have been very skeptical about Sweden doing more, has kind of turned in this crisis. So hopefully that will stay. But I still think that it is important to, as the title of our seminar suggests, to think about the longer run and to make sure that we learn from, you know, the possible things that could have been done better previously to cope with this situation, both in a way that's good for those who end up coming to Sweden and to other countries, and also to prevent any sort of internal political opposition to helping people that may arise if the reception or integration or help to refugees does not work. So for these reasons, I think there are many reasons for thinking about this, and for that particular reason, I'm very happy that Annika Sunden has joined us for this discussion. Annika has a long distinguished career in many positions in Swedish administration, most recently in the Swedish Public Employment Service as their chief economist, or whatever you called it, head of analysis at the Public Employment Service, which of course played a big role in trying to integrate people to the labor market in 2015. And that's a time when you had that position. And Annika is also part of the Migration Studies Delegation that's been around for some time to sort of collect knowledge about how integration and migration can be dealt with better. So I will, give the floor to Annika, and then we can hopefully have a discussion later. So please, Annika, if the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for your presentations and for sharing. And I agree with Jesper. We all hope that this will end soon, but I think we have to brace ourselves for the long term. And I also agree with Jesper that there's so much to be sad about, but it's a good thing to see the Ukrainian people standing up for their country, and also the EU coming together and really trying to figure out a way of receiving the refugees coming into the European Union. I had some slides. It's just a few points just to sort my thoughts. But Sweden, as been mentioned, have experience with receiving a large number of refugees in previous crises. I made these slides on Friday, and I think my number on how many people from the Ukraine that may arrive to Sweden is already dated. The Director General for the Migration Agency yesterday on the news said that the 200,000 people that they were estimating as a high number last week may be a low number, and more people may come to Sweden. It's so far a little bit difficult to get a hold of how many have come, because in order for Sweden you have to register with the migration office, and we can see how many people have come. Most people come by ferry to the south of Sweden or to the Stockholm area, but you can also come other ways to Sweden, of course. So today we don't know exactly how many people have come, but the estimation is more than 200,000 in the next few months. And I think Sweden could help or support the crisis in three ways. It's in Sweden itself and the refugees that are coming to Sweden, but it's also helping the neighboring countries. Poland is taking a huge responsibility, but also the other neighboring countries. So I think in a little bit of a longer term, Sweden also have, together with the rest of the EU, have to think about how we can support the neighboring countries, but also how we can support through our foreign aid budget, how we can support the internally displaced people in the Ukraine. I think it's important to use the experiences and lessons that we have from 2015 and 2016. What happens now is that the EU has engaged a temporary protection directive, and to fall under those rules, you have to register in Sweden with the migration office, and few Ukrainians have done that so far, but that will increase. We see already that's increasing in large numbers, and once you've registered, you have, as we heard from Poland, you have the right to housing, you have right to income support, you have the right to healthcare, you can work in Sweden, children can go to school, and there's some childcare. But one problem that is that this is a legislation that's was put into the legislation is over 20 years old. So there's a lot of issues in this legislation that has to be sorted out before it will work. And I think speed is of the essence here. And I know that the colleagues at the Migration Agency are working around the clock to really figure out how this is going to work. I think the one main conclusion or experience from the 2015-2016 crisis is also the importance of cooperation between government agencies, municipalities, and the civil society and business, and in particular how civil society organizations can help in the reception of refugees in various capacities. And that was something that did not work as well in 2015-2016, and we know that there are many NGOs that are capable and willing to help out. There's also been an enormous amount of money flowing into civil society organizations in the last few weeks, so people are really wanting to help. We can take the next slide. So the first priority, of course, is housing, and to find temporary housing initially, but prepare for long-term housing. And what the Migration Agency is doing currently is procuring housing, and it's a lot. And if you look at it, if you look at the people coming, of course, some of the refugees are staying with family and friends, but the Ukrainian diaspora in Sweden is fairly small. And in the coming weeks, with the large number of people expected to arrive in Sweden, I mean, just to compare, in Sweden was next to Germany, the country in the EU during 2015-2016 that received the highest number of refugees per capita, and then 163,000 people came, but over a much longer period of time. Here we're talking about the number of people that's double that over a much shorter period of time. So the first priority is really to find housing, and here the experience from 2015-2016, when you think about procuring housing, is to do it across the country and do it in areas and municipalities that also have other services, that there are schools, that there are healthcare, and that there are childcare. That was one thing that happened in 2015 and 2016, was that where housing was available, those communities were in many cases small communities that had difficulty then to provide schooling and work for children and parents. And then I would say, even though we don't know how long this is going to last, we have to prepare for the long term. So I think that it's important for Sweden also to relatively soon start thinking about schooling, childcare, and work. It's mostly mothers with children and older people that have come, but if you look at people from the Ukraine, many speak English, many have an education, and there are a lot of work available on the Swedish labor market. And an experience from the 2015-2016 crisis is also that being passive in temporary housing, in not having anything to do, have negative consequences for refugees. So getting children into school, getting small children into childcare, and enabling the adults to look for work, I think is very important and essential for both for a possible integration to Swedish society more long term, but also for staying active if you're going to return to the Ukraine and keep up your knowledge and your competences and your experience. And here it's not quite clear how this is going to work in Sweden yet, but I think there's really a very important role for both for civil society, but also for the public and employment service to provide training, to provide orientation about Sweden and the labor market. And this is also an issue in how this this temporary protective directive is going to be implemented, because that legislation does not provide for Swedish training, for example, to learn Swedish. But I think that is really something that at least at some basic level is a good thing. And we know that that will help to integrate into society, even if you're just going to be here for a number of years. We can take the next slide. And the next then is of course schooling and childcare. One thing then is, of course, how are you going to find teachers that can provide education both in Ukrainian, but also teachers for a large number of children in school. Teachers are in demand in Sweden. There's not enough teachers. And here I think we have to think about new ways of doing it. Our Polish colleague mentioned that to really find among the people who are coming, who are teachers, can we use the skills among the refugees themselves to provide schooling and childcare? And then it's coming onto the labor market. And many of the refugees coming have education and skills in demand on the Swedish labor market. As I understand it, there's a strong IT sector in the Ukraine, for example. And in Sweden, there's a lot of shortages on the labor market, in particular in schooling, healthcare, and IT. So I think that there are a lot of possibilities. And here, for example, I think the Public Employment Service during the crisis 2015-2016 developed digital tools to match job seekers with employers, and that could be used again. For people that have in need of more support getting onto the labor market, we could use private job coaches to help with finding a job on the Swedish labor market. I can take my last slide. But then, of course, like I said initially, I think it's also important for Sweden to provide aid to the internally displaced refugees in the Ukraine and to the neighboring countries to the Ukraine. So that's really solidarity among countries helping out in this situation. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Annika. There's clearly a lot of lessons to be learned by the countries which will be learning by doing in the next months, certainly, and maybe in the longer run. We now have some time for discussion and questions. So please, a question to all the listeners. If you want to ask the panelists, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. Before
can I add one sentence, maybe?
Go ahead.
Yeah, because what Annika said, I think so it is very important, because you said that maybe the most of the refugees will stay in the neighboring country. In our case, it is, I think so, two different phenomena. The one is the similarity of language, because we are start observing the situation. For example, the people, for example, who cross the Hungarian or Slovakian is maybe not the case, but Romanian or Hungarian border, for example, come to Austria, decide to come to Poland because they have a lot of different problems with the communication, for example, because the German language and Hungarian languages are absolutely different than Ukrainians. That's why more and more people decided to come to Poland, because we provide different sorts of help, so different tools of help. But also the absolutely crucial is the similarity to the language. For example, the Ukrainian children can communicate with the Polish children with their own languages, and it is absolutely crucial. And another phenomenon, the second phenomenon, is the situation when I mentioned in my presentation that before the war we had 800,000 Ukrainians. That's why we had the network between the Poles and Ukrainians. That's why it is absolutely necessary to use, for example, also it will be much more easier, for example, to provide access to the labor market to the Ukrainians, especially women, because we have the very well developed the network between the Ukrainians. That's why it would be the transit. It might be the, you know, this the part of the network who might be a transit between the different groups of Ukrainians, to have to much more easier access to the labor market, also to the education. That's why I'm really agree with you that not all of the Ukrainians would decide to leave Poland and to go another member in EU countries, because they don't have any contact with these countries, and for them it would be much more easy to stay here, because this is the, as I said, similarity of languages, but also the very well developed network and of Ukrainians in Poland.
This will be particularly important if people come here with the perspective and hopes of returning to Ukraine, so that they perceive their stay as temporary, and as Hanna suggested, many of them, and you know, from just discussing and hearing the news, many of them definitely hope to return to Ukraine as soon as possible. But Maciej, in the response to Annika's points, I've noticed that again you touched upon the elements that will make integration easier, but which are once again somehow related to the overall environment and networks, rather than the system as prepared or as developed by the government and local government. In your view, what do you think? To what extent the government is ready to offer effective support in schools, healthcare, and how the relationship between central and local government will play out in this respect?
It's very good question, but I think that, you know, the civil society bought the time for the government and the self-governments. And now I think so the government must be much more active, much more involved to solve the problems. I think that, you know, I don't know the country which should be well prepared for such huge influx of refugees. And I think that it is also the question about the numbers. I try to estimate that we are ready to really help to provide the integration, different integration tools for maximum 800,000 of refugees, not more. And but that now we have more than 1 million. That's why we should think about the relocation within the European Union. We have to relocate the people from big cities, from the large cities, into the small cities, where we have also the different provided the well-developed infrastructure, who might be a solution also for Ukrainians. But you know, it would be very difficult to provide access to the education and labor market, healthcare, for more people than 800,000. And I'm a little bit afraid also about the starting of the tensions between the Poles and Ukrainians, because it is still a very short period of time when we provide absolutely fantastic help and aid, but still in the short period of time, with the middle in the middle period of time or longer period of time, I can imagine the tension. For example, if the Polish children should have problem with the access to the best schools, because, for example, Ukrainian children will be welcome there, and we have to carry on, and also to engage whole European Union in the how to solve the problems. And as I said, I'm not a very big fan on mandatory relocation, but voluntary relocation might be a solution. And I think because I talked to my colleagues from the different countries, and I think still with no very nice response. But I think that still the European societies are much more better prepared for welcome the refugees from Ukraine than, for example, refugees from African countries.
Okay,
that's why it might be also maybe the question, but either the issue to discuss later on. I see that two.
Thank you. Yeah, Annika raised her hand. Go ahead.
No, you asked whether there are government systems, right? And I think there is. I think it's really. I very much agree with that. The EU as a whole has to take responsibility, and of course, Poland will not be able, even though people, of course, want to stay in the neighboring countries. If this prolongs, people will start moving, and I think have to move across countries for it to work, and therefore I think, having government systems, but also governments working together with civil society in an organized way, and then it is really housing, education, and work that are the important components, and that fairly quickly get back to something that looks like it. Of course, life is not normal, and get back to normal activities like children going to school, parents going to work. And so here, government agencies and governments have a large responsibility. And I think, really taking a holistic view. So looking at all aspects of life for the people coming. So it's not just providing housing, even though that's the most immediate, but it's also thinking about these other components.
Thank you. Hanna?
Yes, thank you. I would like to actually support Maciej on his arguments that already almost 1.5, slightly more than that, 1 million it's a huge influx. It's huge. I mean, no matter how well prepared you are, you don't have million of empty houses. No country does. So I agree that there should be assistance in terms of where people may move, those that even want to move or may consider moving further than the Poland. At the moment, for example, in Warsaw, they don't have information. They don't have any guess of how to get there. For example, just an example, I'm currently in Warsaw with my friends, and the son of the host is spending like 5 to 6 hours in the Warsaw railway station helping people. He speaks Russian, and that's an incredible asset. And every day people are asking him, how can I get to Riga? Or how can I get in some small, I have friends somewhere in a small city, but I have no clue how to get there. I have no idea what is the relatively large city nearby so I can buy a ticket. And where should I go to get a bus? Okay. And it's this huge number of people that are desperate, they're stressed, and no system actually can process this number of requests. So without the assistance, both in terms of humans, in terms of buses, in terms of information, Poland already has hard time. With all my appreciation of the incredible hospitality that we observe, it's already getting satiated, basically. Okay, so we should not, or the EU should not wait while the situation gets out of control and leads to the tensions. And acting sooner than later is crucial in this situation because of the very large number. Ukraine is a huge country, so the outflows are large just just by number, by a share of a small of a large population.
Thanks. One question popped up in the chat, which I would like to raise, and I guess this is a question to Annika. The question is on how we could. It's from Mateusz Krawczyk. How we could support and involve Ukrainian NGOs in the host countries. You know, how to bring in the energies and involvement of NGOs from Ukraine in host countries. I mean, of course, we are currently in a situation where any management across the border is essentially impossible. But has Sweden had any experience along these lines?
Not with the Ukrainian diaspora, but we've had it with other diasporas. I mean, Sweden have accepted. There's a lot of refugees that come to Sweden from, for example, from East Africa, from Iran, from Iraq, in the Syrian crises, and we know from research that diasporas can be very important, and diaspora organizations and civil society organizations can be very helpful and very important in the integration and help when people are coming. So I think we really need to explore that. In Sweden, the Ukrainian diaspora is fairly small, but I'm sure, I mean, in Poland, like you've said before, there must be a large diaspora that and civil society organizations that can be part of the process. But I also very much agree with that we have to think about a mechanism where people can move across Europe for this situation not to get. I mean, it's impossible. It's so large number of people. It's impossible for one country to do it all. But diasporas are very important. Diasporas are also important in resettlements once the war. Hopefully, the war will be over soon. But diasporas are also important in resettlement.
Maciej?
Yes, we have in Poland a lot of different, these Ukrainian-based non-government organizations. And for example, Ukrainian House is one of the most active in the last days. And I think so. The Polish non-government organization, Ukrainian non-government organization, are working hand in hand now to solve the problems. And if I well understand the situation and the new law, it would be the similar support for Polish or Ukrainians non-government organization. It would be equal treatment because all of them are based on the Polish law. That's why I think I hope and I think and I'm sure that it will be also the source of money from the government to Ukrainians and the Polish non-government organization to keep them on the ground, because they provide absolutely fantastic aid for Ukrainians refugees. It is absolutely necessary also to employ more and more, I can say, standing corps, because we have to teach them. Because what Annika said, we have to be prepared for the very long-term support for them. Try them to include them into the education and labor market. Still, as I said, we should treat our guests from the Ukraine as the guests, because we believe strongly that they would be able to come back to Ukraine in the short period of time. But we have to also be prepared for the worst scenario, to try to integrate them in the Polish society. That's why, on the one hand, we have to treat them as the guests, but on the other hand, for example, in the May or June, if the situation maybe will be a little bit more clear, we should take the decision what would be for example, what should be done, what we have to done, what we have to do. For example, in the 1st September, what would be the best scenario for Ukrainian children? To provide them Polish program of teaching and learning or teaching, or Ukrainian. That's why, now still I think but the last decision should be taken in the middle of the May, because you do have also the holidays, summer holidays, to prepare Polish schools to include and welcome more and more Ukrainian children. Thank you.
Thank you. Many challenges certainly ahead. Hanna.
Yeah, just a very short comment as an opportunity to address some schooling questions. For example, Ukrainian government is doing some actions, some steps in that respect, and I just saw this morning the announcement that online schooling is now available to Ukrainian students, to Ukrainian kids. So, but they need access to internet and some support in that respect. So it might be quite possible a very different solution that was not considered previously. So you don't need to create these classes or these places. You can involve teachers that moved and provide the space for these Ukrainian children while supporting from IT perspectives this online teaching. So in this situation, the coordination with the Ukrainian government may actually be a very fruitful solution, not only relying on the EU members and the EU infrastructure, educational infrastructure.
Hanna, fully agree with you. I think still that we have to also provide the remotely teaching. Absolutely, yes, because it would be much more easier. But still, you know, for example, 1 or 2 days per week, the Ukrainian children should go to the Polish school and try to, you know, to have the network also with the Polish school. We should avoid to keep them in the reception centers or the temporary stay centers. That's why it was absolutely necessary that they should go to Polish, also to Polish school 1-2 days. But I fully agree with remotely teaching is also the solution. Thank you.
Can I just say that is one very important experience from in Sweden from the previous crisis, is that to start early, to start education immediately. I think it's a great idea with using remotely. When it works, use the remote education and using Ukrainian teachers, but it's also important that children go to the school in the country they're in. I think, you know, being passive during this waiting period, even though we don't know how long people are going to stay in Poland and other countries, the waiting period, if you don't use the waiting period, it has negative consequences for the people involved. So really getting kids to go to school, parents to do some work, to learn about the country they're in, learn the language, it has positive effects. And that's really an experience, because in Sweden, when in the previous crisis, then people came and had to seek asylum, and there was a long waiting period until they got asylum. So there's a long period of time before they could start work or go to school, and that really had negative consequences. So even though we don't know how long this will be, I think start early and really prepare for thinking the long term.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a sign that we are learning not only from the previous migration crisis, but also from the pandemic, where distance learning and homeschooling basically was developed in most places. I think we are past our time. It's already 6. So I think we'll be closing unless there are any urgent points or questions among the panelists. I think we will be closing this webinar. Thank you to all the panelists for your participation. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Of course, our thoughts are with everyone in Ukraine, and we hope that this tragic war will be over as soon as possible, and that everyone who had to flee will be able to safely return to their homes. So thanks again to everyone who joined us. Great thanks to Dominic Nielsen and Davis Plotniks for organization and for their technical assistance. Please remember that you can support the efforts of the Kiev School of Economics in their provision of humanitarian aid in Ukraine. You can find details on the free network webpage and on the website of the Kiev School of Economics. We will be certainly back with more webinars in the future, depending on how this war develops. And we all hope that we will soon be able to host a webinar, not about the dramatic conditions, but about the support to Ukraine in circumstances once the war is over. So let's hope this happens as soon as possible. Thank you to all panelists. Thank you to all participants. Goodbye. Thank you.